So let me go on with a couple of questions. We talked a little bit, Mr. Thompson, and actually I'm going to take this to the GAO because this was before your time. The electronic slate program that we paid to develop custom hardware and software for the enumerators last time around in 2010. It's my understanding that never really worked beyond them being able to enter their time. From a practical purposes, they weren't able to put a lot of data in that. Is that consistent with your findings, or have you investigated the success of that at all?
Well, in looking at the major systems that were acquired for 2010, that does seem to be consistent. So, for example, with the FITCA handheld computers, which was custom developed hardware and software, ultimately the Bureau delivered a half-baked solution that, ran into significant cost overruns and ultimately, at the end of the day, required that manual workaround in order to meet the immutable 2010 deadline. And that ultimately led to a $3 billion increase to the ultimate cost.
And I commend that mistake to you, Mr. Thompson, and Ms. Cha, as a consideration with respect to really something cloud-based and less done in-house. Computer technology doesn't have a 10-year lifespan. Technology changes so quickly that you really are potentially buying a computer system that will be used for one census, when maybe renting something through a cloud service might be worth looking at. You talked a little bit about statistical methodology. There's no proposal in your statistical methodology that does away with, we're going to try to count everyone. We're not going to make assumptions like, when somebody does a phone poll of X number of likely voters, they extrapolate the whole country. We really are going to try to do what the Constitution requires. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly, Congressman. I was very clear in my confirmation hearing about that, is that that's not a technique that I think is appropriate for taking the decennial census.
Can you tell me a little bit about you're spending a lot of time and effort on geospatial data. There's a lot of that already out there, and it doesn't change that much. Obviously you get new houses built, but they don't move. At what point are we doing something that there's no longer a need for, that there's such a marketplace for with GPSs in everybody's cars and the prevalence of Google Maps? At what point is this geospatial data collected and maintained by the government a worthwhile deal, or something that, private sector has taken it over, we've seeded it, and it's done?
Well, you are talking about something that's very dear to my heart in terms of targeted canvassing. That is, we don't have to build everything. We don't have to. We can buy it. We can get it off the Internet. We can work with private companies. We don't have to do it all ourselves, and that's why it's exciting now to look to form partnerships with the private sector to get information that will. I'm stumbling. I'm sorry. That will allow us to not have to canvass all of the country.
Okay. And finally, I hope Mr. Lynch will explore some of the postal. He mentioned in his opening statement the possibility nobody knows the area better than the postal worker who walks it every day. I think there's a huge opportunity for that, understanding that postal workers are paid a lot more than census workers, so we've got to factor that into the cost-wise equation. But I know Mr. Lynch brought it up. I'll give him, if he doesn't ask the question, I will. And then finally, my last question is, you mentioned the need for congressional action with respect to possibly authorizing sharing of data, and Mr. Collins brought up the possibility of amending the questions both on the short form census and the American Community Survey. Can you the sooner we do that, the better, I think, in your preparing. At some point, could you also let us send a letter to this committee with some of the changes that you think you would like to see in legislation, because we actually probably move slower than you do. So with that, I'll recognize Mr. Lynch for a second round of questioning.